what should people know about the cooperation of Kaspersky Lab with the Russian security service? To what it matters. Maybe not even a lot of people understand that they have Kaspersky Lab software on their computers. So to how significant the whole issue is.
Well, it's a very important issue, and it's a very interesting development we got very recently, thanks to the Washington Post story. Why it's important? Because we've been in this kind of discussion about the real nature of cooperation between Kaspersky Lab and the FSB for more than a year. This debate started right after the election in the United States. And there is no doubt that there is a cooperation between the FSB and the Kaspersky Lab. Well, actually, Eugene Kaspersky never denied this cooperation, and his people never denied this fact. The problem was the nature. So the line of the company is to say that they are cooperating with the Russian security services because they help them to catch cyber criminals. Completely legitimate task. But with new documents, they shed some light on the real nature of this cooperation. And they explain us that in this case, Kaspersky cooperation looks more, it doesn't look like an expertise, providing of an expertise, as they insisted, but actually as a real help in carrying out an operation conducted by the security services. So in this case, we are talking about an operation against a very powerful criminal cyber gang called Look. And this group consisting of 50 people was caught last year, and most of them were sent to jail. So now we have a ringleader of this group. His name is Konstantin Kozlovsky, and he's in jail in Moscow. And some of his relatives and friends, some months ago, they launched a page on Facebook and started posting some documents which have something to do with his criminal case. Among these documents, you can find some interesting stuff, but one of them is the most interesting one to me. This is a court warrant and a kind of decision of the Russian FSB to conduct a special operation from the premises of Kaspersky Lab. And the idea of this operation is to penetrate the network, virtual private network, maintained by this criminal group Lurk, and to get access to some documents. The interesting thing is that in this case, the operation was conducted not from the premises of the FSB, but from the offices of Kaspersky Lab. And also, the interesting thing is that an employee of Kaspersky Lab was the guy who actually conducted the operation in the presence of FSB people. So in this case, we have a kind of joint operation conducted by Kaspersky Lab and the FSB. The problem here is not whether it's lawful or unlawful. It's absolutely lawful because there is a court decision of the Moscow court to conduct this operation. The problem is the ethical standards held by Kaspersky Lab. They have insisted for months and actually for years. The only thing they do for the FSB, they are helping them with some expertise. Now we understand it's not only about expertise, it's about actual involvement in conducting special operations.
Of course, there is an international attention to anything connected to cyber crime and the FSB because of the alleged Russian interference into the US elections. But in the end, we have up to 400 million users who are the clients of Kaspersky Lab globally. So that is the question. What could we know? And of course, all these issues are very kind of the nature of cooperation of FSB with Kaspersky is something very difficult for some of the people to understand, for the users generally to understand. But what impact it could have? You know, how safe is it for the user to cooperate, to have the Kaspersky software, knowing that they have this close connection to the security service, and how common is that for this kind of the IT companies to work that way?
The big problem here is, of course, many cybersecurity companies, they have some sort of cooperation with law enforcement agencies. And it's a known fact. It's normal for American companies, for British companies, for Israeli companies, and as well for Russian companies. But the problem here is that for many years, Kaspersky Lab have pretended that actually the FSB is a kind of law enforcement agency and nothing more. But we all know that the FSB is not only a law enforcement agency tasked to fight criminals, but it's also an intelligence agency, and a very active intelligence agency. And we know from the United States, and because of the sanctions and some U.S. intelligence reports published after the U.S. election, that the FSB was actually accused of being involved in an operation against DNC, Democratic National Committee, back in 2016. That's why everybody now started asking questions about the real nature of this cooperation. And it's not very helpful that Kaspersky is not extremely, I would say, not very transparent about his company cooperation with the FSB, which is quite understandable. And but if, say, it would be just a Russian company, but it's an international brand, and the problem is that antivirus software is by definition is a very intrusive software. If you install this kind of software on your computer, it means that the company which provides you antivirus software has access to almost everything on your laptop, on your computer. So you should be extremely cautious with this company. You should be absolutely sure that you can trust this company. And that's the biggest problem with Kaspersky. It started losing trust, and that's, of course, I think it's one of the biggest problems for the company right now.
And Andrei, generally, having this opportunity to talk to you, you are the author of The Red Web, the book which explained the struggle between Russia's digital dictatorship and the new online revolutionaries. But you also write a lot about this, I won't say cooperation, but the way how the Kremlin tries to not just interfere, sometimes control, but have more impact on the IT companies. The issue that and social media companies, that companies like Vkontakte or like Yandex, they are really international. They're extremely important for the whole post-Soviet space and even more. So at this stage, in generally, to what extent, and of course, you can overdo the things and think that, of course, if the company is based in Russia, of course, it's by default controlled by the Kremlin. Or otherwise, there would be people say that, you know, it doesn't matter. But the suspicion is still there. So generally, how would you describe currently the state of cooperation between the Kremlin and these companies, bearing in mind how big those companies had become, how influential they are for sharing the news, for for public discourse in a lot of countries, also outside of Russia?
Well, I would say it started 5 years ago, right after the Moscow protest hit the streets and in our capital, and Putin personally became very scared by the protests and by the fact that the protests in Moscow organized mainly on Facebook and Vkontakte, social media, social networks. And he started this offensive in 2012. And in 2014, it became really visible. Why? Because Vladimir Putin personally sent a very strong message to IT business. He had a meeting in June in Moscow with the biggest IT entrepreneurs in the country. And basically his message was very clear. He said, you cannot hide from us. And that was a very strong message because the methods we use to control the internet, sometimes there are some technologies that try to use the internet filtering. We have a very extensive system of online surveillance, but they basically rely on intimidation and coercion. And in this case, it's better to talk not to millions and millions of users, but to try to put the companies under control, to put the companies under control which are in charge of social media. And that's actually what happened. And the most interesting example is what happened with Kontakte. The founder of this network was expelled, and he was replaced by a son of the chief of the Russian state television and radio empire. So you have a father to control television and a son to control the biggest Russian social media. But then something strange happened. We all understand that, finally we understood it, that the Kremlin didn't actually understand the nature of the internet. They started treating the internet in the way they treat traditional media. Like if you control the company which runs the media, you can control the content, because the content is generated by employees, by journalists. But it's not the case with social media. With social media, the content is generated by users, not by employees of, say, Facebook or Kontakte. So Kontakte as a company is under control of the Kremlin, which is for sure. But social media of Kontakte is not under control. Not because it's so free or they love freedom, but just because it's the nature of social media. So when we got some crisis, for example, the crisis in Ukraine, and when the Kremlin tried to deny the military presence in Ukraine, well, actually, users of Kontakte, they exposed the truth. They started posting some photographs and with geolocation, with some information about the units, and they boasted of the exploits, and that revealed the truth. This year, in 2017, when we got the new wave of protests in Moscow and in 80 towns in Russia, once again, users of Kontakte used the network to mobilize themselves. And the company which runs the social media was absolutely helpless. They didn't know what to do with the activities of the users because it's about millions. It's not about tens and hundreds of people. So we need to have this distinction. Yes, the companies are mostly loyal to the Kremlin, and they are put in a very difficult situation. They cannot say no in many cases. But the services they run, social media or search engines, they are not under control because it's against the nature of the internet.